This is Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. I'm your host, Chris Lenois, and today we are speaking with Cindy Jerome. She's running for state representative in Windham District 4, and that's the towns of Putney, Dummerston, and I believe parts of Westminster. Is that right, Cindy?
You know, I was worried about where is that line, and it's this tiny little bit in the northeast corner that's just too connected to Bellows Falls to be otherwise.
Chock full of voters, though.
Apparently so.
Indeed. Well, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining
you.
us today. This is your first time running for a state seat, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
it is.
But you have a lot of experience on the local level. You've been town moderator. You've worked in the school board for the school district there. Right?
Actually, it was the select board rather than the school board. I was on the select board for 7 years, chair for 2, and I have been town moderator for the last 8 years.
So let's start with talking about those roles and how you feel those will help you when you get to Montpelier.
I think just knowing how politics works, it's not glamorous, and it is a lot of hard work, and it's about things that aren't necessarily exciting, but are really important to at least some segments of the population and often everybody. So I understand that. I also understand by moderating town meeting. That's my favorite thing. I love to help people talk about what matters to them and help them enact their will, help them figure out how to make a motion that will achieve what they want to achieve. So that gives me, I think, a leg up in Montpelier.
Now, you recently went through the Emerge program, which is training for candidates like yourself, women who are in the Democratic Party specifically. Specifically, why choose that program, especially somebody like yourself who has some experience in governance?
I was so impressed by Becca Ballant's description of going through the Emerge program that it was clearly what I wanted to do in preparation for running. Madeline Cunin started the program about 5 years ago in Vermont. It's been elsewhere in the United States for a while, but not in every state by any stretch. But yes, it prepares Democratic women to run for office. It's changed recently. The biggest class they had was 15 until this last year, which was the first class that began after the presidential election. And this time we had 29 women.
Wow.
And this year, 23 Emerge graduates are running for office around the state. And a lot of them are running for the House and the Senate, including in districts that are currently red, currently Republican. And they've got a great chance to change them blue. And so we are hopeful that the Emerge graduates will be part of having a veto-proof majority in the House. We've got that in the Senate, but we don't in the House. And we need one.
So when you think back on that experience, what's in your toolbox now that maybe wasn't prior to being part of Emerge?
Many women who are similarly passionate about making change and are going to be in the legislature, and we already have relationships and can work together to make things happen. And then, of course, there's the nuts and bolts. We just had a conference call this morning with Emerge graduates to talk about specifics around how to get out the vote and where to spend money and where to pinch pennies. And I won't go into all the details, but it's fascinating to me.
But that's interesting. Some of it is actual how to campaign.
Oh, absolutely.
Not how to be a representative or how to be a senator or how to do the nuts and bolts of governing, but how to actually run for office. That's probably something that you probably needed more aid with than the moderating or...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And how to comply with campaign finance law, some of those kinds of basics. Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. That's great to hear. 3 candidates for 2 seats in Windham 4.
Yes.
Incumbent Mike Mrowicki's been there for a few different terms now.
12 years, I think, yes.
Yeah, I've had a chance to talk to him. I've never had a chance to talk to Mr. Hashim, who I know is running for the first time as well.
Yes.
But you've had a chance to do some forums with them. One the week before we taped this at the Evening Star Grange in Dummerston, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So what sort of things did you see manifesting themselves during that conversation where you would diverge your opinion from either of them?
We're all Democrats. I think we would all vote similarly. I think we're all good people. I think I bring a lot more experience to the table than Nader does, Nader Hashim. Mike, of course, has been there for a while, so he has that experience actually in the legislature. But I do have local government experience that we talked about. And I also have business experience, experience doing different jobs. I was the executive director of Holton Home for 19 years, and we merged with Bradley House 3 years ago, combined a $3 million business, 40 employees serving 50 or more elders. It's a big job with a lot of responsibility, and I'm proud of the work I did. I did recently resign as executive director to run for office, but I'm continuing to be responsible for the Bradley House Revival Project. I've got to give a little plug for this. Bradley House needed a lot of capital improvements, life safety, and just basic modernization. And we're in the middle of doing that now. Phase 1 is done. Phase 2 is it's looking halfway through. It's amazing how quickly they're moving and how beautiful it's going to be in the historic old mansion. So I'm in charge of that and the capital campaign and some marketing and development work as well. And that will go into the fall.
Right. Well, I got to talk to you back when you held
Yes.
that role, and,
Yes.
and I'm sure you wouldn't leave that unless you knew it was in good hands and going in a good direction.
Yes.
But still,
Yes.
for you to choose to dedicate yourself full-time to what is supposed to be a part-time position, obviously
Yeah,
campaigning is
yeah.
full-time. I mean, you're really inspired. You're really energized.
I've wanted to do this for a long time. I've been really passionate about it. My favorite part, I'd say, of my job with Holton Home and Bradley House was being able to impact lives for the better. And I could do that with staff by paying a livable wage and making sure they had great benefits. And I could do that with residents by making sure they were safe and surrounded with care and had lots of social stimulation, and families could sleep at night knowing everything was okay, and they could go back to being children of their parent instead of caregivers and saying, no, you can't drive anymore, and all of those difficult conversations. I want to be able to impact more lives for the better, and I think that's the key to my excitement about running.
Yeah. Now, I did want to get back to a little bit more about you and your two Democratic opponents in
yes.
the August primary, because that's really the key right now is that
Yes.
August date. And on your site, Cindy Jerome, 4staterep.org, and people have to use the number 4 in that, you say in your bio that you lean progressive. If you win, do you plan on being a progressive Democrat in the same way Molly Burke or David Zuckerman or the lieutenant governor are, and kind of do that dual party status?
I don't know. I'm happy to just start out as a Democrat, and we'll see where that goes. I am so grateful to Emerge and the training and the support that they give, and they're a Democratic organization, so I'm running as a Democrat, and then we'll see where it goes.
So the progressive is really more of just where you see yourself on that left-right spectrum of things.
Yes, in terms of philosophy and the kinds of things that I'd like to see happen in the legislature. That's
And
right.
one of those things that you say when you talk about leaning progressive is systemic change.
Yes.
You talk about yourself as
Yes.
being impatient for change. What does systemic change look like for you?
I want to put people first. I want to invest in communities. I want to not just nibble around the edges of issues. For example, let me talk about healthcare for a little bit. We spend 31% of every healthcare dollar in Vermont on administrative costs. Medicare spends 5% of every dollar on administrative costs. So Medicare for all would be great. I'd like to go beyond that and have universal health care, single payer health care, to really get those costs down, to be able to bargain for prices on prescription drugs, and to not have, I mean, when you go to the doctor's office, do you know how many do you see how many people are in the offices doing all the forms and figuring out the paperwork, and every insurance company is different? It's crazy. I read about countries around the world that have better outcomes, more healthy citizens, people who are getting better care and better results from that care and paying half the price to get it. We spend 18 cents out of every dollar of our GDP in this country on health care. Other countries with better outcomes spend 8 or 9 cents out of every dollar. And it's not because their people are so much healthier to begin with. So I'd like to see systemic changes that will make those kind of basic changes to the system.
So that's, I mean, Medicare for all, and that was one of the items on your website that you highlighted. And we had a governor a couple of terms ago attempt that here in the state of Vermont and abandon it because he did not feel it was feasible. When you think about how we can do that on a state level, because when you're talking about Medicare, that's a federal program. When you're talking about universal health care, you're talking about federal programs, not necessarily things you control as a state representative. How do you see yourself affecting that sort of systemic change on the Green Mountain state level?
I think the system is changing already, thanks in large part to Bernie. Bernie had no sponsors the last time, co-sponsors the last time he said, let's do Medicare for all. Now he's got 18 other Democrats who are signing on to this bill and want to see it happen. All three of the Democratic candidates for governor in Vermont that I've heard from are embracing the idea of Medicare for all, and some are going even further than that. Christine Hallquist, who I've met recently and looked into her website as well, is talking about pairing up with other states in a way that can make it possible for us to do Medicare for all or a single payer system. So I think there's a lot of movement, a lot more acceptance of that. It's not rocket science. A lot of other places are doing it. So I think that the will needs to be there, and in our case, we do need a governor who supports it. We do need a majority in the House like we have in the Senate if we don't have a Democratic governor. We need people who will come together and make it happen. It just makes sense.
I mean, Will was there back when Governor Shumlin was exploring the option. The money wasn't there. Do you think that's changed in the past couple of years?
My sense, and I'm still learning about this, so I can't say that my sense is 100% accurate, but my sense is that Peter Shumlin was not able to see a way to explain to the people of the state how the money would work. If we were not paying health insurance premiums, if we were not paying tax dollars toward Medicaid, and instead that money was bundled and put into health care for all, universal health care, then we would save so much money that there would be plenty of money for the rest. And I can't give you figures, but the ones I just gave you give you a pretty good idea of what's possible.
And I think you're right. I think in a lot of these big issues, healthcare, education, it has been a matter of explaining it versus necessarily the ability to execute a plan, which gets back to the idea of being impatient for changing it and wanting systemic change and talking to people in these other parts of Vermont who don't necessarily share the same ideology as you. And obviously you have some skills in moderating things. Talk a little bit about how you would go through that process with such a bold stance already at the get-go.
I think one thing that might be unusual about me is while I am democratic, progressive, I do want systemic change, I'm also fiscally pretty conservative. One of the topics this morning in our conference call was, how much money have you raised so far? How much more do you need? I'm running a cheap campaign. I'm avoiding some of the swag that costs a lot of money and doesn't inform people, doesn't motivate people to get out and vote, doesn't help you win an election. I'm doing a more bare bones campaign. I've mailed out my palm card to likely Democratic primary voters because those are the folks I really need to target. So I don't want to spend a penny if I can pinch it. I want to save money, and I think that if it can be presented to people across the political spectrum, not only how they would benefit as a family, as individuals, as people that they care about, but also how it would ultimately save money. We don't need to be paying as much as we are for prescription drugs. There's federal regulations that prohibit us from negotiating with the pharmaceutical companies, which is why people want to go to Canada to buy their drugs, because they're so much cheaper there for the same drugs. What is wrong with this picture? I mean, there really is some common sense here. And if you want to save money, then the case can be made for doing universal health care.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about some of those issues and how you are going to approach them, that is how the constituents in the towns that you're going to be representing would want you to.
Sure.
I can certainly think back to the issue around Act 46 and school consolidation, and in Dummerston in particular, there was a lot of concern about that. In fact, making sure that I don't know exactly how it all sorted out in the end, but basically voting to not have the merger go in the way that they wanted it to. And that was on your list of
Yes.
issues, was Act
Yes.
46, which, yeah, it's been a controversial issue, but I haven't really heard a lot of calls to necessarily re-legislate that issue. Is that something that you're planning to do when you go up there, or do you feel there needs to be further tweaks to it?
We've had 2 forums so far. One was in Putney and one in Dummerston for the 3 candidates for the House seats in Windham 4. And it has come up at both forums in a big way. People are very concerned about that. My understanding is that the original legislation is not exactly how things have worked out. That Governor Scott has chosen to interpret things a certain way, chosen to appoint people who are very invested in private schools. And so we've ended up with some changes that I think the legislature wasn't really bargaining for. At this point, the bottom line should be that we have excellent schools in our district, and our towns have voted not to merge. That should be respected. The Agency of Education, appointed by Governor Scott, disagrees with that and has a plan for merger. On September 19th, we get to make our case to the Board of Education, which is not all Scott appointees, and we have an alternative governance structure that meets all the criteria. I mean, I'm going to get personal for a minute. I have a son who's at BUHS. He was an 8th grader in the Dummerston School not long ago. His class had the highest test scores in the state. We have a very good school. I'm happy to talk about things like, okay, fewer students. What about having pre-K and even early childhood education in the school building to make better use? What else can we do there? Dummerston already hosts the special needs classroom for kids who have really serious disabilities. They did that with a classroom that was empty because we have fewer students than we used to. So I'm looking for more creative ways to do that and respect the votes of the towns in the district, that we do not want to merge. We want to collaborate more, but we're very happy with where our schools are. So we'll see where it goes. There are a lot of citizens who are working very hard on this issue. It's really important to all of us. And I'm optimistic, and maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm optimistic.
Well, regardless of partisanship, I think a lot of people felt that one of the faults of Act 46 was it really didn't get at the main issue that people are concerned about with schools, and that's affordability.
Yes,
with
yes.
the property tax system. What do you have to say to somebody who says, when you say that local choice should be respected, that local dollars should stay within those local communities?
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting. This may not be that popular, but I think there is a reality that in some towns around the state, they have voted to merge, and it was a good idea. In some towns, they may have voted to merge because they thought it would bring their property taxes down, and maybe that'll be a good idea. Some towns are more well-funded. They have a higher per capita income, higher household incomes, and it's easier for them to vote against merger. Some people have done a lot of investigation and say, we are not saving money by merging, so don't think your property taxes are going to go down. Certainly what Governor Scott has proposed does not promise to keep property taxes down in years 3, 4, and 5 of his plan. So I'm not sure where to go with that. And I'll also say that it's been really interesting knocking on doors. I'm doing a lot of door knocking, and I did not expect to have a really great time knocking on doors, but I am really enjoying it, getting to know what people think, what they care about. And I will go from one liberal house to the next liberal house and to the next liberal house, and one is all about making sure that independent schools get to continue to be independent schools and not have to be subject to teaching special ed kids. And the next is all about getting their property taxes down. And the next is about, I want my kids and grandkids to have the best possible education because it's an incredibly important in the future, in their future and the future of the state. Yeah. So people are all over the map, even if they voted for the same person for president. And so I feel like I've got more to learn about that, but I also feel like I can be effective at finding a way forward that makes sense to the great majority of people.
Yeah, well, I'm sure another thing that you're hearing a commonality around is affordability of living in Vermont, period,
Yes,
due to
yes.
low wages. And that's
Yes.
something else that you're passionate about is the $15 minimum wage.
Oh my gosh,
And
yeah.
again, I'm not an economist, you're not an economist, although you do have business experience. How possible is $15 an hour
Oh my
really
gosh, it's
in
so
a state
possible.
like Vermont?
With our unemployment rate where it is right now, what is it, 2.8% in Vermont or even lower? They just came out with a new number and I don't remember
Right.
what it is, but it's very low. And what you're seeing is employers have to raise the rate they're offering to people to get people to work for them or to stay working for them. I also know from my experience many years ago at Holton Home, I pushed the board and the board was great about it. We want to pay our staff a livable wage. And that's been our aim ever since. And we've done a really good job at that and generous benefits. And we've done it with a sustainable model. We're even a nonprofit and we're careful about how much we charge our residents. We serve a lot of Medicaid residents. So I know it's possible. I've been doing it for years. And I think that if capitalism based on unemployment rates increases wages because supply does not meet demand, then, and it's happening, surely we can do it legislatively. I feel like $15 an hour over how many years? The next 6 years? That's a pretty small change. I believe that anybody who's working full-time should not be living in poverty. They should have a decent place to live. They should have transportation. They should be able to go out to pizza once in a while. That is not happening on $10.50 an hour. That's the Vermont minimum wage right now. That is not okay. It feels to me like a moral imperative. We really have to increase the minimum wage.
And one of the business sectors that you highlight that you think there is potential for economic growth here in Vermont is green energy
Oh
and the
my
green
gosh,
business
yes,
sector.
yes.
I was curious, especially in the gubernatorial race here where we have an environmentalist like James Ellers. We have somebody with a lot of experience in energy cooperatives in Christine Hallquist and Brenda Siegel, whom I know she's passionate about
Yes,
environmental
yes.
issues too. Do you see yourself aligning with any one of those gubernatorial candidates, or perhaps even Ethan Sonnenborn at age, 14 now, I think he just turned? I mean, do you see yourself
Yes.
aligning with any of the gubernatorial candidates
I
on the
see
Democratic
myself
side?
aligning with all of them because they're all excited about what our state can do in climate change. We can lead the country. We can be a beacon. We can show how it can be done, and all of them have ideas for that. I like all of their ideas. I want to do all of them, and I think that's possible. So it's very exciting to me to see who's running this time. It's a matter of making sure that we elect a Democratic governor.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned right before we went on the air that there are a couple other issues that you've added to your website, which, by the way, is Cindy Jerome forstaterep.org.
And I want to emphasize the .org. I really believe in the not-for-profit difference, so I decided to use that.
But I just want to, ask you, adding these at this particular time, what prompted it, and what are those issues that you wanted to highlight?
Well, what I added today was mostly about something I really do want to emphasize today, which isn't an issue as much as this race is all about the primary. We're talking about the Democratic primary, 3 people running for 2 seats. No Republicans have filed to run, which isn't surprising. Our district, Windham 4, has not sent a Republican to the legislature for decades. So whoever wins the primary is almost certain to win the general election in November. The primary is August 14th. I was surprised to learn that 60% of people in our district vote early, and early voting has already started. You can stop by your town office anytime you want when they're open, and you can get your ballot and vote and be done with it. So it can be a time that's convenient for you. Some people really love to go to the polls on election day, and that's great. So do that too, but vote. This is your chance to have a say. We don't have contested elections very often, and this time the contested election is in August. So I really hope people will go.
Yeah. And we are quickly running out of time here, and I did
my.
want to give you a chance to address the voters at home with a lot of things you did now. One way I was kind of going to try and help you with a prompt for that, if you need, is just what do you want voters to be thinking about you as a candidate? Is there one specific thing you want them holding in their mind when they go to the polls?
Yeah. I want to make sure people realize how much experience I have that I can bring to bear in Montpelier and how passionate I am about getting there. I've been wanting to do this for many years, and when David Dean decided to retire, I met with him a few times before he made his announcement, and I asked him, what do you want to see in your successor? He said a humanitarian and someone who has a good, successful business experience. I have those things. I'm ready to serve, and that's why I'm hoping for your vote. Thank you.
Cindy Jerome, great to see you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
And thank you at home for watching Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. I want to let you know that you can watch any of the episodes in this series at brattleboro.tv.org. You can watch those when they air as well as on demand. And please remember once again that the primary election date is August 14th. You can go to your town clerk's office for a ballot now if you'd like to participate in early voting. Thank you.